Welcome to Purdue University College of Science Superheroes of Science podcast. I'm Stephen.
And I'm Sarah. We will be discussing anything and everything related to the science classroom and interviewing scientists.
Because as we know, scientists are the superheroes behind the science.
So join us as we learn about the scientists and explore current trends in K-12 science education.
Hello and welcome to Superheroes of Science. We are here with Phil Sands from the Department of Computer Science at Purdue University. Hi, Phil.
Hello.
How long have you been computer science K-12 outreach coordinator for Purdue?
This is my 6th year.
So, and now computer science is like extremely important in the state now that it's in the standards and stuff, right? Is that what I understand?
Yes. Since 2016, there have been computer science standards in with the K through 8 science standards. And so in Indiana, you are going to be required to teach computer science at an earlier age. And that's great because previously I feel like the high school offerings were sort of piecemeal involved in the most in the business programs across the state. And so there are elective courses now. We will have more motivation for older kids to take those courses because they'll have seen it before.
Great.
That makes sense. All right. So teachers have this kind of thrown at them like everything else, and they're scared to death, right?
Sure, I've seen it.
So what? Yeah,
Yes.
I know. What are you going to tell? I mean, it's an elementary teacher. Then what do you tell a middle? Then what do you tell a high school teacher right now?
Well, I think there's a couple things I would tell them. First of all, while I know it will be a bit of a burden when they start, a lot of times when I have them sitting in front of me, I tell them that there are lots of things that they can do that do not necessarily have to add in to new units or new parts of the curriculum. They can do things that integrate well with the work that they're already doing. And really the challenge for them is, I think, leveraging the abilities that the kids already have. These kids are very comfortable with technology. They don't know everything about technology. You still have to work with them, but I think their comfort level with some of these things, the things that they've already seen, kids have been doing an hour of code now for over 10 years. If their schools have allowed it, but also because parents can get engaged with that. That's a free resource that's online. So these kids have had some coding experience. There are lots of kids who do robotics kind of as an extracurricular. There are a lot of kids that get involved in other ways of seeing coding because they know more about coding. It kind of has more of a national presence, I think, in terms of like the visibility of computer science. So teachers don't have to sit in the classroom and say to themselves, I don't know anything about computer science, because you're going to come into a classroom where the kids will bring some of their own experiences that you can really, I think, leverage so that their experience is much richer.
Now, we were talking before, and you had suggested that I could start teaching computer science without even touching a computer to start with.
That's definitely true.
How? That doesn't make sense, because the computer science, you have to have a computer in my head.
Well, I mean, and that I should also clarify, it's not to say that having a computer isn't helpful. Because I think there's one distinction I would want to make first and foremost, which is that sometimes computer science and computer programming are conflated. People think that they're one and the same. Computer science is really the study of all things relating to the computer, and you can talk about a lot of the ideas that are common across these various components of computer science. Something, for instance, like an algorithm. You can talk to kids about an ordered set of steps, where if you give that set of steps to anybody, it could be a human being who is acting as the computer, they can interpret those steps, and based on the input they're given, they should get the same output if the algorithm is correct, right? And that process of identifying the patterns of steps and trying to write something that's complete and understandable by anybody can be done without a computer.
It sounds like a version of Simon Says.
Yeah, it sort of is, and that would actually be a great way to teach it. You want to write it? We should write an activity like that.
Yeah, we could do that.
We could do that. Yeah.
Collaboration.
But I mean, I think that's the thing, is that you can be very creative as a teacher, and with some understanding of the big picture ideas, you can really work on some of these concepts. As another example, we talk to teachers about taking problems and breaking them down, because when you're a computer scientist, a lot of times you're not, if I was a programmer, for instance, working in the industry, I wouldn't work on the whole thing. I'm not writing Microsoft Word by myself. I'm working on one piece, maybe one part of the spell checker or something, right? And so your ability to take a problem and break it into pieces is something that we call decomposition, and that is a fundamental skill that computer scientists use when they are actually engaged in their work. So where are other places where we see decomposition in other fields, right? You're taking, let's say, in social studies, you've got maps. You're starting with the United States, which is a country. That's a concept. The nation. You're talking about state governments. You're breaking it down to smaller pieces and what are the differences between the big piece and the small piece and how those two things relate. It's that kind of thinking that we're trying to get people to understand, because as they get older, those are the skills we want them to really have. It kind of lends itself to that. We want you to be able to think, not just be a repository of facts. And I think the computer science skills can be helpful. I believe they can be helpful.
Phil, I know we've worked before in classes with computer science and science activities, and talking beforehand and then afterwards. I know you've talked to me before about teachers sort of getting stuck on the terminology, and I like some of the insights that you've said before about that. But is there a way that teachers can, when they hear the word and they start to feel like, I don't know this word, we need to write this down, I need to define this, what are some benefits to sort of just getting over being confused by the word, but then just sort of almost embracing that?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge. And I have to say, because unlike Stephen, I was a high school teacher, and
Right. I was too.
I had a young person in front of me most of the time who, where, not that we weren't talking about vocabulary, but
Right.
I could assume that they understood some vocabulary, right? And when in the work that I've started to do over the last several years with younger kids and the teachers who teach them, it's become apparent to me that that terminology is very important to them. And when I explain something, sometimes I use words that then I have to go and define again. So it becomes this process of really trying to get at the core of what those things mean. And I think there's a benefit for the kids of being able to use words. One of the big terms in computer science that we talk about with younger kids is abstraction. But abstraction is a hard idea for an adult to grasp, right?
It's very abstract.
It's very abstract. But within computer science, there are a lot of abstractions. That's why we use it a lot. It's like, as an example, I can write software for the computer without knowing how the hardware piece is going to actually take the little ones and zeros and manipulate all that. I don't have to know anything about that, because what I'm writing looks a little bit like English and a little bit, there's symbols
Right.
and that sort of stuff. But there's a translation process, and the abstraction there is that I can work in one space without understanding the other space, right? And so bring it back to that idea of talking about vocabulary. How can we find examples, like if I'm talking about decomposition, if I'm talking about abstraction, parallels, whether they're in other fields or what have you, that relate. There are a lot of people who have developed curriculum and resources for teachers. As an example, code.org, which provides an entire suite of free tools for you to teach computer science at the K-8 level,
Okay.
where they have vocabulary. They'll have things you can print out and put on your wall with the vocabulary, and they'll have examples of those things. So, sometimes, and I know this from trying to learn other things, sometimes all it takes is someone pointing you to the right resource. And then once you have that resource, you are able to, as long as you're motivated and excited,
Sure.
you're able to jump through. Of course, it would be helpful if you had like a mentor or somebody who could also help you get over some of the things that are challenging and that you're still having trouble grasping. But I do think there's a lot of free resources out there that can help you with a task like trying to get the words right in terms of defining them for kids.
Good.
How did you get into computer science?
When I was young.
Young, old, I don't know. How'd you get where you are?
Yeah.
You're
Well,
working on a PhD now, right? I mean,
that's-
you're moving.
that's
You're
true.
moving up in the world. Here.
or down.
Something.
In many people's eyes. This is actually something that I feel privileged in. I think is evident with a lot of people who are currently working in computer science. My dad, who had his own business, bought an Apple IIe computer when I was a kid. And for me that was a fascinating thing. Just like the TV sometimes is fascinating, the gadgets that you have as a kid. I don't know, did you guys have things like ham radio and things like that, or like things that you're taking up? Everybody, I think, at least in the old days when we were kids, not to say that we're old, but we are. Everybody our age, I feel like, did a lot of that exploratory learning where you had things that you just took apart and just to see how they worked. And sometimes you didn't understand afterwards, but at least you got your hands dirty and you could take things apart. For me, that Apple IIe was kind of like that. My dad bought it. He ran probably I actually don't even know. He probably ran some kind of office software. I have no idea what was available back then. But for me, it was like, hey, these floppy disks can have games on them, or these floppy disks can do, this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
And my older brother was a high school student when I was a kid. So he was taking a high school level computer science class because, it was available, and we lived in an area where that someone was doing that. And so he showed me how to do some basic programming. And I will actually tell you a silly story about this. There is unfortunately, Mad Magazine. You guys are familiar with Mad Magazine, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it recently is no longer being published, I guess. I think they
I don't
went out
know.
of
That's what I was
business.
going to say. Is that still around?
Yeah, it was. They tried. But when I was a kid, there was a Mad Magazine where in the middle of the magazine there was a huge set of instructions in BASIC, which is a programming language, that was there for you to type in. And I was 6. So I sat there and I was like typing everything
Wow.
in. And when you were done, it drew a picture of Alfred E. Newman's face
No.
in the program.
What?
Huh?
And I didn't get it right exactly at first. There were some things wrong with it, but it was kind of an
Messed his face
interesting,
up a
like,
little?
first, yeah, as well, yeah. But it was kind of an interesting experience, right? Like, what a silly thing. And I bet you when they put it in there, they were like, no one's going to do this. But I did it. Like, I was like that kid. I was like, oh, this is so cool. I want to do this.
You'll be contacted now.
Well,
You did it, Phil Sands.
Yeah, I wish I had taken a picture. I should have taken a picture. But I think those kind of experiences that, one of the things that in some of the work I've done at Purdue and that I care about a lot is this notion that, like, for a long time there was this feeling that computer science was only for young men. A lot of white and Asian men were going into the field and a lot of women were not, a lot of other underrepresented groups were not. And I think about that experience of my family had a computer and I was encouraged to play with it. Are we doing that? Are all families able to do that, or are all families having that opportunity? I'm sure there's lots of families who don't. We go to, as in our work at Purdue, we go to a lot of rural communities where they're not sitting with a computer at home. Maybe they're only access to technologies of a cell phone eventually or something like that. So, where are their inspiring moments where they're getting a chance to, like, really get their hands on something like that and see that it has value to them? If to that point they were like, well, maybe I'll run the family farm, or maybe I'll go into a small business, or it's like it's your experience, like your exposure to those kind of things.
So do you think the microprocessors like the microbit and Adrenos and Arduino, am I saying that right?
Arduino, yeah.
Sorry.
It's Italian.
Oh, well, sorry. Now that I
makes
know
sense.
that.
That
it
makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot more sense.
Okay.
Do you think these are good ways that teachers can get students now excited that they could do actually, because
Yeah.
you can program those with a little bit of learning. It's not too hard to do, right?
Right.
And you can do sky's the limit, right?
Oh, so you say sky's the limit, but I think, like, the best thing about those things is, when I go onto their websites, like, we go and do things like Scratch. Scratch, I think a lot of people have become a little familiar with it. If you don't know anything about it, you get a little cat that you can move around the screen and you can pick other little animated characters, but you basically give it instructions to move.
It starts with block coding, right? Or is
Yep,
that
you
just
start with these
keywords?
little blocks.
Okay.
You don't have to make mistakes with your typing, which is a problem that you run into later. And that people are getting more comfortable with. Well, that's the way these things like the microbit works, where there's block coding, and so some of these devices, the Arduino is a little bit of a step up. The Raspberry Pi is a little bit of a step up, and those are things that people are kind of familiar with. But the Sphero, which is like a little robot that rolls around, it's like a ball that you can
Yeah, I hate
program.
those things.
I don't love it either, but it's okay. It's an eye catcher for a kid. It's exciting,
Yes.
right?
Some teachers really like them.
I agree. I found that too, actually, and I have to admit, I'm not a big robotics person because I get frustrated by it because it doesn't always do the same thing, because there's real life. I like my little pie in the sky, perfect world. I can't handle these arbitrary
reality.
cracks in the pavement and things that just drive me crazy. But but there's so many places where you can use these familiar tools. And I think the ideas there are easy for kids to grasp, right? If I have a microprocessor that can read the temperature, which we've played
Yes.
around with,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, sir.
That's an entry point to talking about some things in science. And so I've got it, like, we can use it in the classroom, but it's also something that's, like, very understandable for a kid. They see the temperature, they know what it means, and so they're collecting that data, and I think that feels really powerful when you have a little device and you told it to, like, print the temperature on the screen that's on there. And you did that, right? Like, how cool is that you have that power to, like, create something and see the instant results?
It does build confidence. I mean, yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It is cool.
It's super cool. And these things are relatively inexpensive, right? I think the microbit is maybe $15.
Which is just crazy cheap compared to what, I mean, everything is so much cheaper.
Yeah. When we were,
And smaller.
I remember being, and this is probably still the case in some schools, but, like, having a computer lab.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
You'd reserve
one set of
it.
machines,
Yeah.
and if something went wrong, it was like, well, that machine's out the door because we
Right.
can't afford to buy more. Well, now, like, a lot of these kids, I mean, I was helping my nephew program on the phone when I saw him last, which is, it's nuts. It's
I know
crazy.
It's really-
most schools these days are one-to-one with some sort of technology. Not all schools,
Yeah.
but most schools are seems like they're going one-to-one with some sort of technology. And it seems like these programs that you can do, especially, I know that block coding we have on the old iPads even.
Yeah.
So it's like with
Yeah,
Gen
you
2
take your
iPad,
finger
whatever.
and stick your finger on it and drag it where it
Yeah.
needs to go.
Wow.
Yeah, it's perfect.
So it's scary if you haven't done it, but it's really doable once you play
Yeah.
with it.
Another point on that, because I hear that too, like from the teachers, it's scary. But the thing that I think is empowering about computer science is that when you're, especially in the programming realm, again, I don't want to like conflate the two, but if you're going to program, you get a feedback system. So if you do something wrong, you at least know it's wrong. You might not know what's wrong at first, but you at least know it's wrong because you expect something and something else happens. And a lot of good tools will give you some kind of feedback. And so some of the practice is just, how do I read that feedback? How do I use that to help me iteratively redesign this? You know, and so for my teachers who are familiar with the next generation science standards and some of the engineering practices, that's in there.
Yes,
You know,
it
and
is.
so now you're incorporating other things that you want to be doing anyways, right? If you're engaging with this kind of stuff.
Definitely.
That's powerful. I love it.
I admit I was scared to death. I'm not a computer programmer, and that's what I think of with computer science. Still, I think you have to know C# or C whatever C is, and I don't know those things. I mean, I was always happy to C- in school, but now
You want to get a C++? Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, you helped me though, because I came to you and you gave me some programs, and I had a middle school teacher who was scared to death. I'm like, well, let me come in and try, not knowing anything, and I will admit we did great. The kids, a couple of kids had seen it before, because she did it at a summer thing and did it at home at the library. She didn't have a computer, the girl didn't. She went to the library and did it. And it's like the kids knew more than us, and I was really good with that,
Yeah.
and not surprised.
As a teacher, you have to get into that slight uncomfortable zone where some teachers they don't like it when a kid, might know more than they do. But if you can get comfortable with that and, like I said, leverage them and give them a chance to be we all say this, if you can teach something, you really have to understand it. And so if these kids can help you teach some of these ideas to other people, oh my gosh, you're helping that one kid with their confidence and some of their abilities, and then you're helping yourself as you learn some more, and you're helping the other kids as well. So I think if you can get over, I don't want to sound rude here to the people listening, but like if you can get over yourself, you can really do some cool things. And I have been at so many schools where the person who is the groundbreaker in terms of learning the technology becomes a huge asset to every other teacher
Yes.
supporting them, and that really boosts their value in the eyes of the administrators and the community members who were like, wow, this person took this risk for our kids.
Yeah.
That's a cool feeling too.
Phil, I feel like there's some overlap with what you and Stephen are talking about, and then also what we had spoken about previously about people that maybe have been in at the beginning and have ability to get their hands on computers or different things, and then some of the research that you're doing for your PhD. So I don't know if you want to. So I know we had talked before about exactly what you're saying, that once you get into this and then you feel that success, and then you get past that, and then it's like, okay, now there's something new. Now I can try this. I don't know what.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to bore everybody talking about some of the ed psych stuff, but I mean, it is true that like self-efficacy, your ability, your beliefs about your ability to accomplish something, is a big, it's a big signifier for your future success. If I have high self-efficacy with a computer, then the research has shown in all sorts of different areas that I will eventually have success in that space, right? So I think the difference in terms of computer science is that I don't need Mrs. Smith, Mr. Jones, whoever my teacher is, to tell me I'm doing well, because the computer will tell me whether I'm doing well. It's like that feedback piece. So there's an opportunity for the kids to feel good about themselves. So one of the things that I'm doing as part of my graduate work, as part of a grant we have, is that we're working with these teachers in New York City. And I can't give too many of the details of this because I think the person is going to publish some of this work. But they basically had students create scratch stories about their lives, their individual lives. And some of the students who were not, who were first generation American students, were telling the story of where they came from and what things were important to them. And, you know, so there are so many opportunities for you to like leverage aspects of the kid's life to give them self-confidence, and even, you know, outside of the realm of computers, build their own, like, you know, feelings about themselves and their self-respect and all these things. It's really, that's, I think, why so many